when we start to question the fact that, like, have we progressed, or have we learned from anything, or have we fixed anything, not a lot comes to our mind.
There certainly is incremental impact that we're having, whether it be in policy and law, but I think there's something more radical that we can commit to in the future.
Hi everyone, this is Akanksha Podheriya, founder and host of Podheriya. Make sure to visit the Podheriya Instagram at Podheriya, the YouTube, that's also Podheriya, all lowercase, Podheriya, and most importantly, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, or any of your preferred platforms so you never miss an episode. So now going back to today's episode, today I have the opportunity to speak with one of the most accomplished and inspirational individuals that I know. She is First Lieutenant in the United States Army and the first African-American woman to earn the role of First Captain at the United States Military Academy, the highest ranking position amongst the Corps of Cadets. This is a major advancement in racial and gender equality within the United States military. She also graduated in 2018 with a Bachelor of Science in International History and a minor in Environmental Engineering, and was named by Glamour magazine as one of the top 10 college women of the year. And it doesn't stop there. She was granted a Rhodes Scholar in 2017 and earned a Master of Science with Merit in Refugee and Forced Migration Studies from Oxford University in 2019, and is currently pursuing a Master of Public Policy from the Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Simone Askew.
Thank you so much, Akanksha. I'm super excited for today's session and just want to thank you so much for even asking me to be on today. It's such an honor. Really excited to chat.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the most important things that I know you value, and I do too, is selfless service, and how I can just give a quick dictionary definition of what selfless service is, and that is a service which is performed without any expectation or of result or an award for the person performing it. So what exactly is your take on selfless service, and what are some of the things about selfless service that you value the most?
Yeah, so when I was younger, growing up in Fairfax County, actually also at Fairfax High School, I just remember really the hyper competitive nature of being in that school district. And for many reasons, I think mostly because it's one of the wealthiest school districts in the country, there's a lot of focus on not just high school performance, but that preparation for college performance as well, and where you end up going for your college degree. And with that always in mind and always as like a looming pressure, I think it was very obvious that a lot of the work and activities that people were engaged in were a lot more motivated by the capacity to add that to a resume or an application, as opposed to serving to serve because it's valuable to serve. And so I think I really started to think about selfless service and value it because I resented that culture. I felt like going into an activity to serve others with a desire to advertise it later for my own self-gain meant that I wasn't going in with a spirit of selflessness and thinking of others. Rather, I was going into these activities thinking of myself. And that led to poorer service, if you will. So I just think selfless service is something that might not be natural and might not be something that is always advocated in our communities, but is so central to how I want to live my life and how I really try to encourage and inspire others to live theirs. And I think when we think about others in everything we do, we have much more fulfilling lives and feel and actually inherently feel much lighter and abundant in the work that we're doing. So yeah, that's really why I value selfless service and love to talk about it.
Absolutely, and I know that you've achieved so much in your life. I know that you've done X, Y, Z, but you've done it phenomenally, and I think that's so important that you use whatever platform that you have or whatever position that you have to spread that passion for selfless service and just really spreading the good, positive vibes, I guess. But yeah, and I know that another thing that you're also passionate about is reparative justice, and how in our history and in the textbooks that at least I learned from in school, and I know that many people have, we often find that there's so many wrongdoings done by the people that lived in our places in the past. And when we start to question the fact that, like, have we progressed, or have we learned from anything, or have we fixed anything, not a lot comes to our mind. So could you just elaborate your feelings on this issue?
For sure, Akanksha. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think there's so many ideas that are circulating in our minds over the past year about what harms have been done to marginalized populations. I'm thinking to communities of color, to Indigenous communities, to queer communities, to communities of women. I mean, all of these historically marginalized and disenfranchised populations that really are speaking about the wrongdoings that are not just happening this year, this past year, the past 5 years, but have really been embedded into American history. And the question is, in the face of progress, what is the way forward? Because there certainly is incremental impact that we're having, whether it be in policy and law, but I think there's something more radical that we can commit to in the future. And so when we think about reparative justice, I think it's important that when we account for these harms and we think about the ways in which we repay them or repair the harms that we've done, that we're thinking of healing, right? And we're thinking of ways in which we can heal the communities that have been historically harmed, as well as enforce accountability mechanisms to the institutions that have done those harms. So, for example, I'm thinking of the murders of so many Black Americans by police forces, and how do we go about repairing the families who have lost loved ones as a result of this violence? How do we set up institutions within American democracy to assure that there is minimization of crime without unjustly taking the lives of people of color that we're attempting to serve and protect? So when I think of reparative justice, I think it's just so central to a lot of the discussions that we're having. And it's very uncomfortable, because it means that we're uncovering a lot of ugly history that doesn't make us feel good about ourselves or the organizations we're a part of. But the beauty of that reparative aspect is it means that there's a future of a more healed sense of self and a more healed community. So that's what I think of when I think of reparative justice.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things that I've come to see in the past few months, the past year, is that, like, how, I mean, our age group of anywhere teens to early 20s to just that age group is just so wise. And I think that we've found a way to adapt to situations really nicely and quickly. And we've also had a really good, like, growth mindset when it came to everything that's happened in the past, and how we can learn so much from whatever has happened. But yeah.
And in many ways create a new future. And I know this sounds so corny to be like, you guys are the future, you guys and gals are the future. And I hate to say that, but it's so true. In many ways, our generation, and I'm going to include myself in that, is observing from maybe a position of not as much power. We aren't necessarily the ones in public office. Aren't necessarily the ones on the Supreme Court. We might not be the ones that are heads of powerful institutions, but we're watching a lot of the mistakes, but also successes of the organizations around us. And we can learn from that and take note and think in the future, it doesn't have to be like this. And we're going to espouse a leadership that is much more just than what we're seeing around us.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think about is when we're looking at the people in office, or the people that are working in higher up positions and executives. I think of me looking at my brother, not necessarily that he makes mistakes and all, but he's 4 years older, and as he went off to college and stuff like that, I really noticed I've got to learn. He always tells me that don't ever make the same mistakes I did when it came to this or that. And I was like, of course not. Why would I do that? And now I really apply it into my real life. And it's oh no, he was right. Some things that you need to change, and how change is not always something bad, and how being adaptive or adaptable to like different situations is so beneficial for people. The next thing that I just wanted to move into actually would be oh, no, wait, never mind. One thing before the 7-question speed round. Okay, so when we think about critical thinking, I think of that one book that had a whole lot of logic puzzles, a whole lot of math in it that I used to do every day in first grade. But now that I've grown up older and hopefully a little bit wiser too, I've learned that critical thinking is definitely a lot more valuable than that. But another thing I've learned is that critical thinking is an invaluable skill in almost every scenario that you're in. And whether it be you're working or you're a student at school or in any other situation, critical thinking has become something so useful to me, but I think is something also useful to everyone else that's listening. And what I wanted to ask you was, how do you feel about critical thinking, and how do you think it applies to us at this time specifically, but also just in general?
No, thank you so much for that question. I think the application of critical theory or critical thinking is really so essential at this age, because in many ways we're very early in our career as lifelong learners. And in that early stage, we may be introduced to a lot of things that we didn't know about previously, getting our first grasp on the world and seeing a lot of people much older and veterans of this lifelong learning career, if you will. And with that, I think often comes maybe an insecurity that we don't know everything. And so we're taking everything that everyone says as the truth. And well, I think that is so essential to intellectual humility, to acknowledge there are many things that I don't know, but that is why I'm committed to learning always. I think there's also needs to be an element or spirit of criticality in what we do as well. And this will be super essential for us as emerging leaders and people who assume positions of power, that we look at the leaders or the organizations around us and say, I know that American politics functions in X way, but I also know that there are Y and Z things wrong with that system, and that there is a possibility for us to reform it and for it to be different in the future. And I think that fruitful and constructive criticality in the process of learning means that we can do exactly what you noted between you and your brother, right? You can look at his experience and say, I really look up to and admire my brother. At the same time, I know that he did this and he did that I don't want to do because it wasn't fruitful to his journey. And when I go through my process, I want to be different. And I just think critical thinking is so important and wasn't something that I espoused until much later, when I gained the confidence to tell people who were older than me sometimes that, hey, I know this is what you're telling me, but it doesn't sound right. It doesn't really sound in line with moral leadership or with just treatment of others. And I think that critical part will be really important in the learning process for all of us.
Yeah, and not only, I feel like critical thinking is not something that a certain age group has to be thinking about. You know, I feel like kids as little as like first graders or kindergartners, they already have a mindset of critical thinking when it comes to just applying it in their daily lives. Sometimes they tell us no, and you listen, because sometimes they are speaking the truth. And I don't think there's a certain age group where you have to be right or where you have to be wrong, or where you can't say that there isn't something wrong with whatever situation you're in or whatever thought process that you're getting taught. And I think that's a really, again, valuable skill, like you said. Yeah, well then now I think would be time for the 7-question speed round.
Okay. I think I'm ready. We'll see.
Perfect. So I am just going to quickly brief over what the 7-question speed round is for anyone listening or watching on YouTube. But so how the 7-question speed round works is that I'm just going to ask 7 random questions, and they're absolutely random. In fact, I had to search up random questions to ask when I was writing these questions down before I even wrote them. But so what the goal is of the 7-question speed round is to essentially get to know the guest in a more chill, laid back, relaxed way, where you just learn about them as a person as a whole, and kind kind of just who they are. So I'm just going to begin with all the 7 questions. So my first question to you is that if you had the world's attention for 30 seconds, what would you say?
Yeah, this was probably the most stressful one to think about, but I definitely would say that in light of the most recent election, that political awareness and engagement, in my opinion, is the most essential pillar of upholding our democracy. And so regardless of your age, whether you are of age to vote or not, I would really encourage everyone to be aware of and be knowledgeable about the ways in which not only federal level politics, but also local level politics impacts our lives, and the ways in which we can engage in advocacy to be represented in that policy making process. So one of the things I definitely regret being under 18 was that I wasn't really aware as much or constantly reading about or informed about what was going on around me, which meant that I was particularly reliant on my parents and in many ways adopting their political views, which weren't necessarily wrong, but I don't think very closely mirrored what I believed and what my experiences were. And I think if I had started engaging and being knowledgeable about those things earlier, I would have been a much more independent and, as we noted earlier, critical thinker about those things. And so that is, if I could say one thing in 30 seconds over the past couple of months, I think the political awareness engagement at every age is the number one I would advocate for.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that real quick, but I think also myself, like before these months of quarantine, I feel like one of the most unaware people about when it came to like anything about politics or anything about how legislation works or how or like what powers these office holders have and how it really works. And then actually over quarantine, I got involved in an organization where it's like a think tank and we write policies and we advocate for them and talk to these legislators firsthand. And I feel like that is one of the most valuable experiences I've had in so long. And I hope to just like have more experiences like that where I was actually talking face to face with these senators or governors or whoever it is that I got a chance to speak with. And I think it's so crazy how there's such a huge age gap between these office holders and I, but we still have some sort of mutual understanding, or we have a mutual passion of really just providing for the people. And I think that's something that everyone can learn at any age.
Yeah, definitely. And as we do that learning, so important to understand the ways in which policies really do impact people's lives. And often, if we come from a more privileged background, transition of administrations or modifications of policies in minor ways might not impact our lives radically, but for many people, they have monumental impacts. And so as we build our foundation of what we believe and what we want to fight for, I think it's so key that we also think about those who are most vulnerable to those policy changes and making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect the most vulnerable of our communities.
Absolutely. Just being educated about whatever's going on is key to everything. And moving on to the next question, what is the most used app on your phone?
So for me, honestly, I would say most used is probably Gmail app, which is not fun at all, but I did put CoStar because it's probably the second most used app. I'm really big into horoscopes and understanding all of my friends' signs, what their moons are, what their suns are, and also reading my daily horoscope as well. So I would say that's the most used app after email, of course.
I love that. No, I find myself on Instagram, like those like zodiac accounts where I'm like tabbing. I'm like, oh, where does it say mine? What does it say mine? Or what does it say? Or how am I going to feel today according to this Instagram account?
Exactly. And I also, about people I really admire, I look up their birth chart and try to see what signs they are. And Stacey Abrams, who's a personal hero of mine, is also a Sagittarius, and I'm a Sagittarius. Wow. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be her when I grow up.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, well then next question is, what artists are you listening to currently?
Okay, so I know 21 Savage just came out with an album a while back, so I've been listening to a lot of that, and there are these really cool excerpts throughout the album that I think are so insightful, and been listening to a lot of him, but also listening to a lot of Lauryn Hill, she's kind of a throwback a little bit, and then also Daniel Caesar. So getting into all of my feels.
Daniel Caesar is my favorite singer of all time, forever. And,
so amazing. And I'm so late to the game, to be honest. I've only started listening to him a lot the past maybe 3 weeks, but now I can't stop.
No, his music is actually addicting. I'm not even joking. There's a time, this was actually a while back, but I would literally listen to Daniel Caesar songs for any occasion, whether like even if I wasn't sad, I found myself listening to like his saddest songs for no reason. And I don't know, his musicality, like as a singer, that's crazy. I don't even know how he makes those songs.
I don't even know how to explain what happens to me when I listen to him, but I feel like I'm in a melodramatic music video.
Same. I'm like transported. I don't even know where. I'm just not in wherever I am right now.
It's a spiritual endeavor.
Absolutely. Okay, the next question is, what's your go-to like food place or like fast food place, and what's your order there?
Yeah, so I spent the past couple of months in Fairfax and was always going to this Thai restaurant called Bangkok Golden Thai. And it's right across from George Mason. Always got the Penang curry, a little bit spicy. And I mean, honestly, Thai food is my number one favorite. But it's so easy to get bad Thai food if you go on like Grubhub or like Uber Eats, stuff like that. But Bangkok, top 10.
I didn't know that. I usually just got whatever. I never liked Thai food when I was younger, but like as literally like the past like 2 years, I've gotten to like really like Thai food and Thai curry, and like the green curry especially I love. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's so good.
I think it's called green curry.
Oh, well, then I guess I'm right.
So good.
The next question is, what would you do to spend a rainy afternoon?
Yeah, so it's funny because it's actually raining now outside, so it kind of is a rainy afternoon here, and I'm really obsessed with candles, so usually I light a bunch of candles, put on a little bit of Daniel Caesar, and then I love to journal and just write through what I'm thinking. Oftentimes I find my mind is very overwhelmed with thoughts, and sort of in the spirit of melodramatic music video, I love to just write them down and be philosophical and theorize about why I'm feeling this way. Maybe look up my horoscope. But yeah, those are my favorite things to do on a rainy afternoon.
That is so cool. I need to start doing something like that. For me, on like rainy afternoons, like my productivity just goes to like zero, like the slope totally, like I don't even know. But yeah.
No, it's true. When it rains outside, you're supposed to not be doing much. I mean, I think that's the spirit of rainy days, is it's meant to intentionally force us to rest in a sense. So don't feel bad about your productivity going down.
I like that a lot. And now, and I've also gotten a little bit into journaling. I haven't really, like I bought a journal. I haven't done the journaling part of journaling yet, but you know, I'm like a step there.
That's so relatable. I think before I was maybe 21, I didn't journal at all, but I probably had 15 different journals on my bookshelf that I would buy from different libraries I would visit or different countries I would go to, thinking that I was going to journal while I was traveling. Absolutely not.
No, yeah, I have so many, or I do like a page of one book and then leave it alone and leave it on my shelf. But
exactly.
That's how it is. Okay, the next question is, if you could meet any celebrity, who would it be?
I don't know whether to pick. A politician, an artist, public figure, actress. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was Solange Knowles. I think not only her music, but her whole aesthetic is so resonant to me, but also very mysterious. And I also see her as someone who's not really in the public eye nearly as much as her sister, obviously, but she's a very curious figure to me, and I would love to meet her. I think a lot of other celebrities and famous people, I could probably ascertain what they'd be like in an interpersonal interaction, but Solange, I'm still puzzled by, so I'll say her.
Yeah, she gives off like a glowing aura for like, I don't know, it's like her singing or just like her as a person. But yeah, I totally agree with that. The last question is, what was the last book you read? And maybe like a little brief on it or something.
Sure, yeah. The last book I read was titled Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, and the book is, I think, meant to be a dark satire about the military and military service and war, and was the author's reflection on his own time in the military. And I felt like it was very reflective and timely for my transition from grad school back into the Army, and almost finding a way to laugh through the suck or make humor of many of the sucky parts about what we have to do, whether it be the tough training when it's super cold outside, or just like the not fun field exercises that might get mundane. And I found the book very, very pleasurable, but also thought-provoking, and would definitely encourage it to anyone, not only people who are considering the military, but anyone who is intrigued by military culture.
That's really interesting. And I think, yeah, I'll try to take a look at it if I get the chance, but anyone listening, you guys should too. Okay, now actually we are moving on to the very last segment of this podcast, and yeah, we'll just transition right into it. So what the last thing that I wanted to mention was that over the last weekend, actually, I got a chance to listen to Simone's TED Talk titled Breaking Glass Ceilings and the Cost We Don't See. So first off, I just want to say it really inspired me, and it motivated me to really think deeper about like what it really means to be breaking glass ceilings and reaching new levels as an individual within any community as in general, but also how there's like a deeper message behind a lot of things that whether it be success or failure, but there's a lot of stories and experiences that lies behind it. And so could you just tell us more about what message you were trying to relay?
Yeah, I think that TED Talk in many ways was a processing endeavor for me to try to make sense of what my experience at West Point had been, and how I reconciled everything that was celebrated, but the things that often weren't seen in my private moments. And to me, the key message that I wanted to bring forward was that certainly representation in leadership is so essential and so valuable and very symbolic for a myriad of reasons. For us to be able to look up to leaders in positions that we aspired to be in and have those leaders look like us was not only pivotal in my life, but I think will continue to be pivotal in others. But I also think it's so important to recognize that that step of acquiring representation in leadership positions is one step in a multi-step march towards equality. So it is not just sufficient to have a person of color or a woman or someone who identifies as queer to be in these positions, but also important that those leaders, regardless of their identity, bring about change and foster change to serve and benefit the communities that have been marginalized within these spaces. And so I think the representation is so valuable, and often the front page of every, especially this past election, Kamala Harris. And I just think that have to appreciate that representation without losing sight of ultimately what policies we need to bring about in order to change the systems that we're in.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you mentioned was like how Kamala Harris, she said, or at least I know one of the shirts that they're selling for like the Biden Harris campaign or something, it said like to like be the first but not the last. And I find that so inspiring because obviously like we see that there's a person of color, a woman of color in office now, and but what does that really entail for the rest of us? What does that entail for people of my generation or the ones below, and the kids that are growing up now seeing that there is a person of color or a woman in office, and how is that going to really impact them as individuals as well, and inspire them to do similar things and break more ceilings, but also just in general see that there's people like me, again, like you said, people like me or people like my peers that are in office. And I think that's a really valuable point. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is goes along hand in hand with the title of the podcast, Seeking Abundance. So abundance, I feel like, is something that when you have a lot of something, but if you are attracting abundance, what does that really entail as an individual? So what are your thoughts on what it means to be attracting abundance?
Yeah, when I first heard that phrase, which I really love and really resonates with me, I think the first thing that I thought of was the inner work that is so necessary for doing the work in the world around us. And when I think of abundance, I think of an absence of scarcity. A lot of times, I know I've been socialized to think about things as being scarce or there not being a lot. And so me having to fight for X or compete for Y. But I think when you attract abundance, you get rid of that mindset and you think about the way in which we all can access the things that we need to be fulfilled in our lives. And with that, it takes away the competition, the maybe the internal fighting, or even the hoarding of things, the hoarding of knowledge, the hoarding of material possessions. So I really believe that in attracting abundance, it requires first that internal relearning of what we need being accessible to us, and working to make those things accessible to all people. And the first example I think of is my own time in Oxford, when we would spend hours in the classroom learning about the ways in which the organizations or institutions or systems around us were exclusionary in nature, whether it be the military historically excluding women from particular fields of service, or whether it be institutions of higher education not allowing people of color, or being discriminatory to immigrants to the United States, right? We would learn about all of these exclusionary tactics, but then simultaneously be exclusive in our interpersonal relationships as well, whether it be, speaking poorly about people behind their backs, or not inviting certain people because we didn't like them or we didn't get along with them. And I think those 2 years I spent in grad school was really an opportunity for me to engage in praxis, which is that intersection of theory and practice. So yes, I'm learning about the theoretical exclusion, but I'm also engaging in that internal and interpersonal work to not be exclusionary in my own personal life as well, starting at that individual level as I'm also working to understand that systemic level. And I think that is a pivotal element of attracting that abundance.
Yeah, and I think another thing about attracting abundance is when you are attracting abundance, it means that you're working more on yourself, but also not only to benefit yourself, but in the end, you can help others. And there's a sense of gratitude that lies behind everything that you do, and your whatever fruits that come from whatever work that you guys, whatever anyone does, is going to be not only beneficial to yourself, but something where you can help others or teach others, or try to motivate others to do something similar or the same. So that is, I really loved what you said about how you have to be at that level of like praxis where you're in between that practice stage. But the last thing, so the last thing that I wanted to cover in this podcast was any advice you had, or any ways or words that you had to empower others that are listening out there.
Yeah, so the first thing when I thought of advice is thinking about the ways in which I've previously gotten advice from mentors, the majority of them being amazing and thinking about the things that I'm passionate about. But sometimes I interact with people who give me advice where they're just projecting what they did and what they thought worked onto me. And in some cases, it applied to the things I was interested and keen to do. But in other cases, it just showed that they were more interested in seeing a mini version of them than really understanding and appreciating where I wanted to be and and my own process of growth. And so I guess the piece of advice I would give is, as young people seeking mentors and figuring out who our mentors are, I would really encourage all of us to cling to those mentors who really listen to us and empower our ideas and uplift our ideas, no matter how crazy or untraditional or maybe radical they may be. Because just mentors that just project what they've done aren't going to serve us, and they're not going to make us those critical thinkers that we need to be for the world right now. And so that would really be my advice, is pick people who give advice that is thoughtful and sensitive to what you as an individual are aspiring to do with your life.
That's wonderful advice, and it's so applicable in, I think, any field that you either want to work in or you want to just be engaged in. And I think when I'm thinking about that mentorship, that where I would find that, I think back to when I really decided that I want to do something like music, which is really untraditional in, I'd say, a person of color household, but I feel like it's more just a South Asian stereotype of like going into certain fields to study and do that. But I think that my parents have been really, really flexible when it came to that, and how they have supported me throughout the decision. Like when I made the decision, I totally thought I was out of it, because so many people, so many family friends, they also came up to me like, oh, so that's what you want to do? Is that like your main thing, or like you want to do something else? And I was like, and then like I really sat down and I was like thinking about it. I was like, okay, maybe this isn't what I want to do. And then, I learned that like, no, that is what I want to do. That is something that I need. I want in my future. So I went and got advice from people that really, cared about what my passion was, and how me continuing my passion would just benefit me in the future as well, mentally, but also in any other way. And also how the last thing that I wanted to mention about this was that empowering others to do the same. So I think another aspect was me giving the okay to my other peers or friends that are in the same situation as me, and telling them that like, look, there are untraditional paths that you can take, or me letting know my other schoolmates or anyone just how it is okay to like step out of the set conformed lines that we are set to be in, and just go and make something really cool.
Yeah, and making space for different paths. I think that's so key, so key.
Yeah, well, I think the last thing now is just the outro, so we can just move right into that. Okay, so I will just quickly shout out Simone's social medias, and that is her Instagram. It is at Simone Askew, spelled Simonee, Askew, Askew. And that's all. And I just want to thank everyone out there for listening, but most importantly, I want to thank Simone for joining me on this podcast. And I'm so glad that we were able to communicate that one day at Fairfax High School for making a video for our school. But I think it's really great how connections can be established like this, just on the go, but also just getting to know the other person. Really, the amazing stories that you have and experiences that you have are so valuable. And lastly, I just want to thank the viewers and the listeners that are either watching this on YouTube or listening to this on Spotify or any other platform. Thank you guys, because that's the reason why I'm doing all this, where I can share my the guest stories and experiences as well as my own. And I think it's so essential to just constantly be learning, as we said, and just having that growth mindset, and constantly just really thinking deep about everything around you and stuff like that. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Akanksha, and thanks to all the viewers and listeners. Very nice to chat today.
Thank you.